tax relief.
And that's,
We're gonna spend everything we can
Right.
take in.
Right. Well,
Why am I not surprised?
no.
Yeah, exactly.
And more. And there's.
Well, it's in the written scenario.
Right.
But income stated is not actual, it's estimated.
It's in C of the written scenario, like, George is commenting on.
I read it.
Yeah,
I know.
but,
I like the way it's written. I like where the words may are used, and there's ranges,
right,
and so we can rely on the council, or hopefully we can rely on the council to make prudent decisions, balanced decisions, the appropriate decisions, but.
To that first scenario that Robert had up there, of the 25% running down that balance. Let's say in the first fiscal year, we have the 4.04 million that's unassigned. And you run through the policy, you allocate 25% to OPEB, you allocate 25% to CalPERS, and then you got $2 million left. The policy sort of reads, okay, you've contributed $1 million to OPEB, $1 million to CalPERS, you need to reduce the parcel tax by that same amount.
You don't have to do.
You don't have to.
25%
Right.
each.
Well,
No, the next page 2 has other
other
scenarios.
scenarios, and you can do different percentages for either one, and that's kind of what we're discussing here. But that's where that allocation comes in, but if it was $2 million to reduce the parcel tax, that's the entirety of the
right,
parcel
that's the
tax.
whole
If
thing.
you're,
And that has an
if
impact
you're
not
gonna
only on
use this as an
capital.
example and hand it to the city council, I'd like to see an entry for recommendation for,
Right.
you know, following year's parcel tax reduction, roughly
Right.
equivalent to the same thing.
Well, with the parcel tax, it's a flat amount, so it's 1.86 million is the total.
Right.
So that's always gonna be the flat amount, that hasn't changed, that's the constant. So, like George is saying, if we use 2 million, we can't reduce
Well,
it by
You
2
could
million.
reduce the entirety of the parcel tax in that given year, but you have to bear in mind, that's only $744,000 to capital projects. So when you go through this exercise the following year, you're now short
Right.
$744,000 there, but you're also short
On the
$1
PDC.
million in operational costs.
Well,
But you don't know what's coming in for the possible pending increase in property taxes, which
You
was
don't.
what
It's
No.
estimated. It's
gave us a
not
big
an
goose of
actual.
Right.
$1 million plus this year.
Right.
Right.
Well,
Sure.
You know, you have an unknown there also.
plus I don't quite understand. Are you telling me parcel tax has to be all or nothing in a given year?
No, it doesn't.
You can change the rate.
You could change the rate, but if you try and match the two percentages,
you can't.
what you gave to OPEB and CalPERS at the 25% level, and you reduce it entirely, it has both an operational and a capital improvement cost
Right.
component to it. I
I
understand.
understand that, but you don't have the back end, what I just said about possible tax revenues coming in, or any further reductions in expenses at the city level. So you're sort of,
Yeah,
you're making a scenario on one side, but you're not backfilling it.
Mhm. And to give you an insight, when we did this fiscal year 13-14 budget, we showed that if we didn't have the 1.1 million influx into the general fund, the net fund balance or net change for our fiscal year is projected only 362,000.
Yeah, but again, that's, you know, we could sit around and smoke dope and try and figure out what it's gonna be, and we just go.
brownies. You don't
Right
need
around
to
this
use
round.
brownies.
No, when marijuana's legalized, it's one of the initiatives, right? I
Oh,
mean,
God.
60-some initiatives.
I thought you were proposing a trip to Colorado.
I went to
Next
school up
meeting in
there, yeah.
Colorado.
We have property tax revenue projections, but they're only estimates of what's going to occur. And if they occur, that's great.
Exactly, so we're
Right.
dealing with hard
And they're
numbers
usually
on
a
one
lower
side of the thing.
number
but-
than what actually comes in.
Mhm.
You're usually
Sometimes.
off by about 3%, and then you usually increase your expenses by 2 to 3%.
Well-
Which, if you look at it,
We
that's
try not to.
We try not to
Yeah.
increase expenditures, but some things we can't control.
Mhm.
I mean, anyways, I mean, it's, you know, as always, it's very hard to make recommendations when we don't have final numbers on what we want to spend money on. And we don't have final numbers on what our income is, and it's pretty difficult to do.
Well, it's not
So
the,
it's
it's
just
not the role of the
recommendations.
finance committee to delve into those final numbers. What the council's looking for is a conservative policy with a percentage that they can use as a guideline.
I think the policy, this suggested policy you wrote is pretty flexible and pretty well written. I don't like the example with the dam, but you didn't give us any of our tax money back. I think that is the kind of thing that the council is looking for.
Correct. When you look through the other scenarios though, Robert's changed the percentages.
Right.
And I would take that bottom line to your point and just say, this is, per the policy, this amount, the 2 million, the 1.8 or whatever, is what the council could consider in reduction or percentage thereof for the next year's parcel tax.
Right.
And
So-
are you in agreement with the 25%?
No, I'm not saying
No.
that at all.
Okay,
I'm s- it's up to 25%.
up to 20.
Right.
And,
Right.
and there's a whole separate set of issues about whether you're like Alan and you believe the pension system's gonna go bust and Atherton's gonna go bankrupt someday, paying for our OPEB, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's a whole different conversation, just like, I mean, I could make a case that why should we be pumping as much money into those obligations today instead of later? Let some of the people that live here later pay for it, not necessarily the people that live here now. Of course, the bills will run up by the people that lived here before. So all those things are gonna be argued by the city council every year before they send anybody a check. And they're always gonna be dealing with bad information that's 2 years old, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the way this is written, I think it provides, first of all, a trigger point that says, hey, you gotta quit piggy banks overflowing, we gotta do something about it. And B, kind of a balanced approach that they can work from. In a given year, they might not put anything into OPEB. They might not put anything into OPEB or CalPERS. They might put it all towards capital projects, because Jim's, raising hell about the pothole. Yeah. But I think the structure here is pretty good.
And that's why how it's written, it says may be allocated, and not, the council may decide only 10%, or only 5%, or like you said, nothing, and let's just make, let's contribute an amount to capital projects.
But these numbers are purely kind of like assumptions or placeholders. I mean, I was thinking with respect to PERS is starting with projected liability and then looking at the assets and saying under realistic assumptions, this is what it's going to have to cost us. So I just think we want to avoid the kind of Jerry Brown budgeting we've been seeing lately, where it says now we've got a balanced budget, isn't this wonderful? And somebody says, wait a minute, you have to put $4.5 million into the teachers fund. Oh, well, we'll deal with that later. I mean, I just don't think we should pretend that we are overflowing the cash when we have been incurring a lot of serious obligations.
Well, there's 3 shoes that are gonna drop with CalPERS. The first one is coming down in 15-16, that's the 1.1% over the course of each year for 5 years. We already know what that was gonna be, and that's gonna have an
By
impact.
the way, that's
on
not
our rates.
1.1 and then the next year 2.2 and the next.
No,
That's
1.1 each year.
For 5 years.
Each year. The second shoe is what Robert was talking about this morning on their, the rates people are dying, how long, when they're retiring, those sorts of things, the rate tables. That's gonna come in 2018, and that may create, for the town of Atherton, another side fund situation like we've had before. And then the third shoe to drop, which hasn't been addressed by CalPERS yet, they passed over it in November, and in their actuarial reports that we get every year, they've now started including an analysis of it, is the change in their discount rate, their rate of return. So those are the 3 things that the town's gonna have to figure out over the next 3 to 5
Yeah,
years.
but they may or may not have to figure it out. Again, it's another one of these numbers down the road, because the last time this pension plan was sold to the legislature was by CalPERS in a meeting saying, we're doing so good, we can go 3 and 50. And it's going to be funded by all of our successful investments in citizens of the state of California and never see it. If you get back to that situation with the return of the stock market and real estate investments, citizens may never see it. And again, that's another number we don't know.
Right.
I mean, the fact that you say this stuff's coming down the road, yeah, it's in the mix now, but a successful initiative or a change, as I alluded to earlier, I think the pension thing is somewhat in flux at every look at it. And I totally agree with Bob, you could make cases every direction about that whole thing. So I don't know if we set a firm policy on it, that's all I'm saying.
We should have a better tracking mechanism for property which has been sold or coming out of ground, and with its expectation of being taxed. from last year, next year, it takes about 18 months to 2 years to see either the property being done, or finished, or taxable, or whatever. Because quite frankly, we're not building $6 million houses, we're building $27 million houses. And I don't think it's logical to think the income, and what I'm in discussions with Robert are, is only gonna go up by 8%. It doesn't make sense to me. I would love to see some kind of better tracking mechanism, because how can you plan a 3 to 5 year project if you don't have a 3 to 5 year expectation of income? And there is a better way to track this.
Well, this is public money. So from staff perspective, I'm not gonna take a risk with public money, so in the budget, I'm gonna give you a conservative number for revenue projections. I'm not going to try and drill that down using, you know, HDL to come in every year. They do come in every year, and they give us a good estimate for at least the next year's projections. But 3 to 5 years out, I think that's too speculative for me to use public money and make an estimate for that, and then base public projects on that projection.
But it's not, you wouldn't base it, but you'd at least have a view. And I don't think there's anything wrong with the view. I mean, it's just as wishy-washy as he's saying. How do we know?
Right. Well, exactly. How do we know?
I mean, it's like, you know, it's just as much that as anything else, right? So if you're asking for where to put money over time, or to create a policy, you kind of have to have some idea of what that's going to be. So I don't think it's logical, to be honest. I think it needs to be reevaluated. That's why my personal opinion, I believe that the percentages for investment, 20%, are exceedingly high. And it should be quite a bit less as a base policy. Like we should bank upon it, we should try to make at least a 10% or 15% money towards that liability. And maybe that should be the number, but again.
So a range, perhaps,
Right.
you know, from 10 to 25%. Minimum 10, maximum 25, is what you're suggesting?
25 is pretty high.
And this was, what was presented was a basic, a starting point. And as you can see on the other rate sheets that passed out, it didn't go above that, it went below, just to show scenarios and rates. You know, we recommend that we focus on the 3 options, the 3 opportunities, long-term liabilities, the capital projects, and looking at a reserve requirement as well. So that's what we recommend. How we come about, it changed. And again, the may be allocated is just saying up to that. It doesn't have to be.
It's a permissive policy, even if it's a range, it's still a permissive policy. I don't think the council would support a restricted reserve policy beyond our 35% already.
Mandating 10% or whatever it is to any of these buckets. I think that's what we pay these city council members, the big bucks for.
Or don't pay it.
To make good decisions each year with our money based on the situation.
And the situation. All the partial tax money just because it passed.
Yeah, the situation will change, and
They're going to have
I want some of that parcel tax back.
They're going to have a very healthy, they being the council, healthy revenue projection, not projection, but a revenue alternative discussion, you know, whether it's a real property transfer tax or utility users tax, those kinds of alternatives. They're going to have those suggestions to them in March, April timeframe, and have a very healthy discussion. And then following that, they're going to have a healthy discussion on the parcel tax and whether or not to impose it in entirety or less based on capital project projections.
Mm-hmm.
So this reserve policy will come in very handy.
Mm-hmm.
So you said they're going to be presented with alternatives for other revenue enhancement opportunities.
Yes,
We'll be discussing.
That probably won't take place right away, because some may require certain government code requirements, whether it's a 2/3 vote, or some may require, some can be less restricted in getting implemented.
Who's doing that? Are we doing that?
Yes.
We're doing that. Robert and I are putting together that section.
So by revenue enhancement, is that a euphemism for tax? Just like
Yes, it is.
It could be, right.
But not
Revenue enhancement.
So, as item number 6, what are our recommendations? that we should be making. You have recommendations as a council.
Personally, I think it's fairly well written. I think the example could hit more on the tax relief follow-up to it, but I think it's fairly well written. I think it gives them flexibility and triggers a stop to unnecessarily piling up cash.
Are there any alternatives that you want them to consider?
Nothing comes to mind for me.
And
If I had to do it on my own, I would do as follows. I would set the reserves at a certain limit and leave the other two pension plans and capital improvement projects as a flexible item, totally flexible to either this committee to recommend to the council or to the council. That I support about this. There is at least some flexibility. I would like to see flexibility in the pension obligation issues and the capital improvement issues. Reserves, I think we do need to set reserve policy and put money into the savings account. But I also support the position that it's not imposing a partial tax. We don't have it. Because your two ad hoc study show that we can fund almost all the capital projects. And so I'm the optimist. There's a pony in here somewhere, and it's going to be increased. These $25 million homes that are going up are going to pay fuel property taxes. And I think we're going to have an increased property tax thing this year. Well, I agree with the conservative number. I think it's going to be, again, there's a pony in there somewhere. But that's my opinion. If I was the czar. I don't know if that makes any sense or not.
Well, are you proposing something totally different than what's up there, or are you proposing some verbiage changes?
No, I'm not proposing verbiage. I was talking generalities. I think what you have is probably more workable. I'm not a wordsmith guy. I'm not an attorney. But I think it makes some sense. They have to have some flexibility. I am totally against continuing to fund these pension plans until we see where this whole thing shakes out, statewide, initiative-wise, investment-wise, and everything else on the pension issues. I think, I come back to it again, I'm a pound on it, it's always politics, ward hearing 101, fix the potholes, get my son a job. It's visibility, it's visibility.
The 35% reserve policy is over and above whatever this is. That's still mandatory minimum reserve for the town.
What do we have, what is our reserve policy right now?
35%.
35%.
Yeah, and we're in the middle range with the comparable cities of our, I don't see where that's an issue. I would support that, because we do have to put money aside, no question about it.
okay, is there any other alternatives? Otherwise, we move on to item 7. Okay, so.
Well, we actually need a recommendation.
Yes.
The recommendation would be greater flexibility, potentially the review of either reducing or eliminating the parcel tax as it reflects a need for actual capital improvement projects that we confirmed or have approved. And
So
overall,
the language here is it,
the language is not an issue because it
Okay.
uses the word up to.
okay, so but in terms of the way it's written, that would be fine with the
It
finance
is
committee?
fine as planned, except the word up to 25%.
Mhm.
We're gonna request that council review why the money would have to be 25%. It seems to be an excessive number. But again, it's something that's gonna come back that we have to review again as to why.
Actually, it would, if this policy moves forward to the council, this is the policy that staff would then begin implementing. Each budget cycle, we would walk through the policy, provide the council with those alternatives, and they'd make those decisions along with the budget adoption each year. Revise would be part of that report.
Like I said, we're up to that flexibility to make
Do
the
you think 25% is too high?
I think it's very high.
I think it's too high myself.
I mean, I would say 15% should be your max. I don't think 25% should be your max. But again,
Well, we would,
council's going to make
Yeah,
their decision as
I
to
would
which.
agree with both of you on that.
well, what we want to present to the council is something that comes from the finance committee in terms of support. So if the committee is looking at 15% as a good threshold, we'll change 25 to 15.
I would, okay, if I'm going to make a motion, that one of the alternatives would be change the language from up to 25% up to 15%. But I have an eye on this.
I'd second that.
I have one, I see a fly in the ointment from when I was thinking about this earlier. The situation may be such that the council feels a more pressing need to send money in one direction or the other. Maybe nothing's going to OPEB because we've been paying it down and things have changed and things look rosy. Meanwhile, the CalPERS side has gotten ugly. And so in that situation, a higher number, I mean, there's nothing here requires them to do 25 and 25.
Right,
It might do 25 and 0.
right, or 5%.
Right.
Yeah, so that's the fly in the ointment I see if we lower that number.
I would say, I would like to see it limited to lower number, and if these exception situations that you just described would be addressed at that time, rather than, quite honestly, given the way the council's gone back and forth in issues, I'm leery of giving them too much control when we can limit them in some areas. Because as you said earlier,
We
they want to spend.
You can't limit them, they
all
set
that.
policies, not you.
Can't do it.
I'm not trying to be difficult.
They're asking for a recommendation, but they can decide, hey, we don't want to do this, we'll
They
do
can
something
decide
different.
not to take our
That's
recommendation.
why I'm saying I think it's a good voice to say lower the number, because otherwise there are capital improvement projects and there are all the other things we want to have done which are visible to the public. It gives us greater money to work with to actually accomplish this.
But they always come first, the way this is written. I mean, maybe that language needs to emphasize that, but I think the way this is written, the capital project shortfall is dealt with first, right?
And that's a shall, actually.
Right.
Not a may.
Right.
Right, shall.
What's holding us up on doing these capital projects? Do we have,
Which ones? The ones in the master plans?
well, I think just the ones that Jim outlined.
Well, there's not a whole lot of potholes in town, but there are projects in town that we're trying to identify a need out there, which is very easy to do. But to identify them town-wide, we're doing the master plans process to do that. I think those 3 master plans, pardon?
Potholes is a euphemism. for
Yes,
all the
exactly. Those 3 master plans are gonna come up with a lot of projects, and it's just money.
I think it also be sort of a finalization on anything.
Yeah.
And we don't have design finalizations, we don't have cost finalizations, we don't have anything, so therefore, you don't really have a time frame for each project.
But that's what the
You
3
have
years is
that.
a good thing.
Until you have that, then you can't really decide all the excess money, where it's gonna go, to which first.
But it's difficult to have absolutes when we're forecasting. So, it's just like when you mentioned, we're building $25 million homes roughly. Well, tomorrow, those same homes, as market trends change, could be $10 million homes because they sell better. So we can't predict tomorrow. All we have to do is work with what we have. And I think the goal on this is to really just establish a guide. And I know that I heard it several times that several people mentioned maybe even putting the language of consideration of the parcel tax reduction into some of that language, because that sometimes when we see particular numbers, we're maybe not thinking about a parcel tax reduction, and maybe you want to add that language in there in some way or manner to say, even though you're thinking about these percentages, if you don't need it, maybe even consider a parcel tax
And that was
reduction.
one of the recommendations of the Turgis, which is make that it's possible to add a recommendation to have the parcel tax reduced.
Right,
Parcel
Which
tax-
is here.
Evaluated.
which is,
Did parcel tax measure to say $800 or whatever is the parcel, or did it say up to that?
It's an amount set by the council every year based on needs,
right,
up
They
to a
have the
max.
right to reduce or suspend.
right.
You have the.
The history of council here and everywhere else has been the up to on any taxes that are set to go to the maximum. And the park went through that, remember when this thing was first passed, and it was just, and 2 years later, zoom right up to the top. Now it doesn't just push it right over the.
So do you have your alternative language?
Well, I have changing the 25 to 15%, and the verbiage as is written within the staff report includes the parcel tax reduction as part of it. The scenarios that Robert developed were just scenarios as to how it would work. It's not a part of the actual policy. So yeah, as long as you got a 1 and a 2, if you vote, then we're good.
Okay, we vote on both.
So if they don't want to make anything, give anything to CalPERS or OPEB, they just want to do property tax reduction. It's not written that way.
Yeah, you're right, it's an if.
So C should, I think, should read,
The town may.
the council may also consider a reduction in the parcel tax collection for the subsequent fiscal year as a, you know, that's not quite the right language, but if we got extra money and we don't need the parcel tax, whether they give anything to OPEB or CalPERS or not, they should be able to consider parcel tax reduction.
Right.
So you can modify the language in C.
Right, I understand the concept. So it's not an if the town makes an OPEB or CalPERS
Right.
contribution, it's, you may make these two.
And if you made that change and went to 20%, I would propose that as a policy.
75 and go.
No, we started 25-15, so I was in the middle. We all,
Hey, up to 5. I've already given up.
Are we gonna change it to 20?
I mean, I think honestly, like I said, the council's going to make a decision. There's not a whole lot of, but I think it should be emphasized that the finance committee is strongly against such a big percentage. You do have to prove that that's a necessary item, and I don't think that proof is there yet. And I think that as long as we show something to say, hey, that it's too high, then we're gonna have to leave it to council to make the logical decision.
15% is a lot of money.
It's a lot of money, and it's a percentage of. And remember, the percentage of is also a bigger number. It's not like it's a big number.
Okay, I agree with them on the 50. I can go along with the 50.
So reword it to allow a contribution to the parcel, or to allow a reduction of the parcel tax regardless of whether they make it over
Correct.
the CalPERS contribution, and then reduce it 25 to 15%.
Correct.
Can I have a nine?
Aye.
Three on the motion? Yes?
I'm in favor.
Okay, that's good.
So who did the first motion?
It was your vice chair, and
Okay.
And then I made the second.
member Massey made a change, and then modification by Polito. but it
You put something down and we'll go.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll sign
So,
off.
so who's in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Okay, item 7, review and discuss auditing services selection process and form ad hoc selection committee for recommendation to city council. I don't know if you noticed the list of auditing services selection is bigger, which was great to see that. But the response of some did not come back
No.
within a certain time frame.
Correct.
Correct.
It's frustrating.
Right. We submitted, the RFP we posted on the website, and we also submitted as, these firms as subscribers. So they also got it themselves as an email to their firm. And of the ones that, these were the ones that we sent subscriptions to as far as forwarding it, the RFP. There were 6 of them. It was Vernick, Trine and Day, Lance Soul and Lingard, Mays and Associates, OUM and Company, Badawi and Associates, and Macias Jean and O'Connell. The deadline was January 6th, which was last Monday. January 6th, the deadline was for the submittal of the cost proposals and the technical proposals. And of only 4 firms submitted proposals. It was Badawi and Associates, White Nielsen Deal Evans, Mays and Associates, and Moss Lee Hartzman. So I'd like to point out that 2 of them that submitted proposals weren't even sent proposals. So the other part is they did see it on our website and they did submit a RFP. So which is pretty good. That, you know, they are looking on websites to verify who's submitting RFPs and for what. Those
Why do you think,
RFPs.
only 2 out of the 6 responded?
I have no idea. It could be too that they probably have a lot of firms or agencies that they're auditing. I mean, not just municipalities, but there's districts, there's counties,
I
there's.
know, but I mean, you don't think there was anything wrong with the way you wrote the RFP?
No.
Next question, was
No.
there a budget put into the RFP? Like an estimation of,
No, because that's them to tell us what their cost would be to perform the RFP. We would adjust our budget based off what it takes for us to get an auditing service. And so there was no budget in there. It was up to them to provide a cost proposal. The technical and cost proposal for the RFP, I mean, it was a standard RFP process, that requirement that we require based on state guidelines, and GASB and government accounting principles that we put into the RFP. So it wasn't, I don't believe there's anything in there that we put that was something that these firms couldn't do or aren't accustomed to doing. So it could be that they probably have a lot of clients and didn't submit a proposal.
because Boberneck is the one that did, he did Santa Clara and did several different
Within
towns that kind of were surprisingly responded.
right.
OUM, I actually have worked with before in other communities, and I had Robert send one to them just to make sure they were aware of it. He talked to Chris Milius, who's the M in OUM, and they're too busy.
Okay, well, the point is creating the RFP and sending it out and making it public, and that's, if they wanted to do it, they would have responded. So, great. So, for item 7, review and discuss auditing services, so for fun, we've done that. And form an ad hoc selection committee for recommendations to city council. Do we have to do that?
We need, staff would like, we have to do the interviews, but we'd like 2 members of this committee to assist us in doing the interviews in the auditing firm.
You know, I'm sure Greg
Right.
would love to do that, because that's his life is auditing, so it's hard to choose today for that selection.
Actually, he did submit, he did request, he did communicate to me that he requested, he would like to be on that selection committee. So if you all decide to nominate him, he's okay with it.
Good.
And I would take myself out of consideration for that. I have no background in that particular.
I don't either.
Well, I'm an auditor from way back.
Not the point.
I can't say I'm qualified, I'm happy to do it, but
Okay,
not based on some
so
10
Greg
pages of
Conlon
qualifications.
and Bob Polito would be, I would recommend you.
I agree.
Okay.
Good,
We
you're in, Bob.
have an eye on this.
Bring up
yes.
those old skills.
Okay, so the ad hoc would be Greg Conlon and Bob Polito.
So the motion,
Have a motion for this, and
So moved.
moved.
Aye.
Aye.
Fantastic. Okay, so next meeting date? Time to discuss possible joint finance committee, consider in March.
the next finance committee meeting would be the second, Tuesday in March. I believe it's March 11th.
Correct.
The city council meeting, though, that we would propose for a joint meeting would be the study session for March, which is the first Wednesday in March.
So we would probably move then, instead of having our finance committee on the 11th, it would be to the Wednesday, the
You
following.
could do both.
Oh, do both?
You could do a joint meeting with the city council,
Oh, that's
which
right.
is really to talk about, the budget and reserve policy and things like that. And then have your regular meeting on your regular meeting date.
Okay. So the finance committee meeting will be next, the next one will be March 11th, and possible joint meeting,
March 5th.
possible joint meeting March 5th with the council.
2 o'clock?
For the 11th. The study session is at 4 on the 5th.
starting. I'm sorry, what day is the March 5th?
It's a Wednesday.
Wednesday, March 5th.
And our reason to be with them is?
They'd like a joint meeting with the finance committee to talk through the reserve issues and to talk about the budget, and revenue alternatives and strategies, input from this committee.
I can attend, but I have a hard stop at 5:30.
I'll look at the tape.
Yeah, they have a hard stop at 6, so they'll walk out the room at 6 o'clock.
Fine.
Guaranteed.
Okay.